Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So friends, the last DOM gave a talk on the simile of the relay of chariots, or the Ratnavanita Sutta, in which was a conversation between Sariputra and another Arahant. But anyway, it was about the path of purification using the 7 stages of purification as a more contemporary example, like a Pony Express. But in those days, they call it the mail or news went by chariot express, and they ride one horse, or till the horse got tired, and at a certain station they change, and they go in a progression of horses until they reach the end. So the 7 stages of purification are about this these stages of purification on the way towards freedom and liberation. Of course, this is all centered around the teachings of the 4 Noble Truths about the nature of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So normally the path leading to the cessation of suffering is defined as the Noble Eightfold Path, but you could also say it's the path of these 7 purifications. Then you might say, well, the purification of what? Of course, the whole of the Buddha's teaching is centered around, the mind and the accumulation of greed, hatred, and delusion that's within our mind, that keeps our mind caught and trapped in the intricate web of karma, or cause and effect, and the resultant physical and mental sufferings that come as a result of our unskillful karmic actions. So the 7 purifications are basically purifying the mind of the obstructions of both the body and the mind, with the obstructions of our karmic actions, and the delusions in the mind that, again, keep the mind caught in the web of cause and effect, and keep it swirling around according to the dependent origination in the rounds of birth and death. So you could say the whole of the Buddha's teaching is about this purifying the mind of greed, hatred, and delusion, which is the root cause of suffering. And the whole book has been written on the path of purification by a great monk called Buddhaghosa back in the 2nd century. And based on all the thousands of sutras and discourses given by the Buddha, he was commissioned to kind of condense all that into one book, which he entitled The Path of Purification. And the preamble of that book starts out with a little jingle but there was a conversation supposedly between the Buddha and a deity. So a deity, which is like an angel or some celestial being, came to the Buddha and said to the Buddha, "The inner tangle and the outer tangle. This world is entangled in a tangle. Now I ask the perfectly enlightened one, who succeeds in disentangling this tangle?" And the Buddha's reply was, "A wise person standing on the ground of virtue and concentration and using the skillful wisdom, that person succeeds in disentangling this tangle." And so it is mentioned the inner tangle and the outer tangle. The outer tangle refers to the world of sensory objects, including our body. We look at our body, we look at somebody else's body, and the mind, it gets attached with desire or aversion and other things. And also the other things that we see, sensory objects, the things that we see, things that we hear, smell, taste, feel with the body, and even think with our mind. The mind gets attached to these things with either attachment or aversion, greed or hatred, and all the karmic actions that we take in life are driven basically by either the greed and wanting to capture and hold on to the pleasurable objects or sensations, and the opposite of struggling to get away from or push away the unpleasant ones. So basically the outer tangle means the external world. And the inner tangle means the tangle of our mind in all of our memories of the past and all of the inner conditionings and sankharas and habits that we've been accumulating, not only in this life, but of course even from past lives. But especially in this life itself, there's enough of them. Ever since you're a young child, and the mind was developing its, memories. I don't like this, and I like that, and this is good, and this is bad, and then because of these mental memories and thoughts, it keeps on reproducing these. When we come in contact with the objects, the external objects, all of these internal memories and nervous system habits get triggered off. So it's the outer tangle and the inner tangle, basically, of the sensory world. And it's a tangle because, there's a couple of similes. Like if you've ever been in a jungle and you see the thickets of bamboo and vines and everything that's in a jungle, it's very hard. People have to hack through, the jungle with machetes to, clear a path. Or take a kitten, right? Take a ball of string and throw it on the floor in front of a kitten. And then the kitten will go on and play and unravel the whole ball of string, and, it gets all, wound up, and then when you go to try to wind it back up, the ball of string is just a mad mass. It takes you hours to unravel it. So, like that, our mind has become entangled in the world of, the outer tangle of sensory objects. And we've allowed it that because we haven't understood the nature of suffering. And people have grown up and so on. They've just let the mind get caught up in all those things and into the web of karma. So basically that's kind of like, the tangle. So who succeeds in disentangling this tangle? So the first of those purifications, the 7 purifications mentioned in the relay of chariots that I went over that whole 7 purifications in one Dhamma talk, basically, in the last DOM. But people said, well, there's too much to try to remember, at once. And so I was asked to maybe, give more details onto those 7 purifications. So the first one is the purification of virtue, or you could say the purification of our sila, the conducts of our body, speech, and mind. Because that's really where the web of karma unfolds on the daily level, is our interactions with the world in our thoughts, speech, and actions, direct karmic involvement, which then in turn brings its karmic results in terms of either pain or pleasure, or confusion or clarity. But there's painful results of our actions, or the pleasant results. But unfortunately, the mind is dominated by greed, hatred, and delusion. So, more than 50%, I would say even more than that, 75% of our actions would be, from the Dhamma point of view, labeled as unskillful, or as of bringing, unpleasant results, because the mind is dominated by ignorance, basically. So greed, hatred, and delusion are the 3 driving forces of all of our, conditioned living and our involvement with the world. So basically it means practicing sila, because we understand that in the Buddhist terms as living by the precepts. So, this morning you took the 5 precepts. So a layperson tries to live their life by purifying the 5 precepts of not to kill and harm other living beings, to refrain from stealing, refrain from sensual misconduct, refrain from telling lies or other unskillful types of speech, and refrain from intoxicating the mind. Because all of these 5 actions are what drive, 90% of people's activities and actions in their life, and the direct consequence of the suffering that comes back to them on account of that. So the purification of virtue, because that's where the direct suffering comes from. Whether it's a punch in the face if you curse somebody out, or something else, or just the guilt, worry, remorse, and fear from having done things you shouldn't have done, or not done things you should have done. So these actions come fairly quickly back to us, or they may be delayed. But anyway, most of the problems that we experience in life are the result of those unskillful actions. And anybody who's trying to practice meditation knows that if you sit and try to meditate, and the mind has a lot of guilt, worry, remorse, and fear because of or other anxiety and stress based on those actions, you see it blocks your mind from going deeper into meditation and gaining concentration. So that's why the purification of virtue is said to be that first level of purification, because again, the majority of our suffering comes back from those actions, those unskillful actions. So to purify the negative karmic actions and to cultivate the wholesome actions that bring less suffering, or to bring more mental ease and even happiness, then that's the purification of the virtue. Not only eliminating or overcoming the negative actions, but deliberately cultivating the wholesome actions that help to weaken the impact of the negative actions. Because without that, then no further type of progress really would be made on the path of meditation. So that's why the sila, is considered to be the foundation of the spiritual practice. So when people take the precepts, try to live by the 5 precepts, or even taking the 8 precepts during retreats, or people that want to practice a little bit more intensively, or even the 10 precepts of a novice monk or others who care to take those levels of precepts, and then even the more precepts of a bhikkhu, or a fully ordained monk or nun. All these different categories and degrees of precepts or conduct are ways of, again, purifying the mind of deeper and deeper types of attachments and so on. So, and actually the practice of sila is, the word sila comes from a root word to cool, or cooling. So basically, I like that definition, because it means basically to cool down, cool the nervous system. Because people are hot under the collar with greed, hatred, and delusion, doing all kinds of negative acts. Cool down. So the young people these days have, they say chill out, right? But basically it means to calm down the nervous system by abandoning those unskillful actions and the heated mind that comes as a result of guilt, worry, remorse, and fear that comes from those actions. So, there's a lot said about the practice of sila, but I'm not going to go too much more into it right now. Then, after the practice of sila, or the purification of virtue, comes the purification of the mind. Actually, the Pali terms for purification of virtue is sila visuddhi. The purification of the mind is chitta visuddhi. And basically that refers to the gaining of concentration. So normally our mind is not concentrated, it's scattered, and it's the slightest little sensory impingement, and, throws the mind into a tizzy with, disturbance and annoyance, and, attachment and aversion, and it easily gets distracted. And nowadays, you know, with the attention given to ADD or whatever, ADHD, you know, all this, you know, I forget the definition of it. What's the name of it?
What does it stand for?
Yeah.
Attention deficit.
Yeah, that's
hyperactive disorder.
Yeah. Well, most people's minds are like that. So that means they can't concentrate very easily. They get easily distracted. So, of course, you'll never gain any progress in meditation if the mind can't get concentrated. So, the Chitta Visuddhi means gaining concentration, where the hindrances, the 5 mental hindrances, subside. So the 5 mental hindrances are defined as sense desire. It means the mind always on the lookout for some pleasurable object to go after, or just running back in your own memory, creating sensual fantasies or other things in your mind. And then the opposite, which would be ill will or anger, churning up old memories. Oh, that person hurt me, I'm going to get payback. And, or getting annoyed very easily, like, you know, various things coming at you, getting disturbed by unpleasant sounds and smells, and having ill will and aversion, basically. So the mind is constantly moving back and forth. And then restlessness and worry, it means the mind that's just kind of antsy, like sitting on an anthill, and, you know, worrying about what time is it, and just being agitated, also worrying about things, again, that you hadn't done, you did that you shouldn't have done. And just a basically kind of underlying agitation, restlessness that's in the mind. And then there's the doubts, just doubting whether, you know, meditation has any benefit, doubting, what is this Dhamma anyway, you know, I don't know, who's the Buddha, you know, is he a fictitious character or what? Anyway, all kind of doubts that would prevent you from giving your best shot at meditation, because while you meditate, why am I meditating? It's so hard, you know, there's got to be an easier way, let me take some LSD or something. But anyway, it's basically the doubts that prevent you from, you know, the meditation, from giving it your all. And then there's basically just lethargy, mental and physical heaviness and lethargy that manifests as kind of, you know, when you're trying to meditate, and is, you know, kind of nodding out, or just the mind that's kind of just dull and you know, doesn't want to do anything. So these 5 hindrances. So the purification of mind is reached when these 5 hindrances have subsided. And they subside by the practice of meditation, by practicing either concentration or mindfulness and insight, or a combination of those, that the mind becomes temporarily purified. So that's what is called temporary purification of mind, which comes in a certain meditation periods when you've reached a deeper level of concentration. Of course, when you come out of that, then the hindrances do come back up again. But at least temporarily, you gain temporary purification of mind when those subside and you attain the levels of, you know, concentration and good awareness. And then the full purification of mind that comes only, you know, in the stages of enlightenment. But what we're referring to here is the purification of mind in terms of the hindrances that are blocking the ability to meditate. Okay, so there's the purification of virtue, and again, that's a stepping stone for reaching the purification of mind. Because you won't reach purification of mind until the hindrances have subsided. And the hindrances remain active because of the not following, sila, and the guilt, worry, remorse, and fear, and other vexations that come because of your uncontrolled kind of actions and overindulgence and intoxications and so on. And especially that's why abstaining from liquor and drugs that dull the nervous system and so on, and dull the mind and interfere with the mind's normal processes. That's one of the biggest causes of also, especially of drowsiness and lethargy and so many other actions. Because when we get intoxicated, then we usually break the other types of precepts. And that just creates more of the hindrances. Now, the next level of purification is the purification of view. And this begins the last 5 of the 7 purifications, dealing with the mind, basically, dealing with our ignorance. So greed and hate were involved in the first 2, basically. Our greed for objects of the world, so it's our greed in attachments and aversions that lead to most of our karmic actions. But it's the ignorance that also feeds that, not knowing the truth. So the purification of view is the beginning level of overcoming ignorance. So we can help to purify our actions just by the force of, let's say, practicing sila. You could force yourself, okay, I won't kill anything, I won't kick that dog, I won't poison those cockroaches, I won't kill this person. You still might like to, but at least physically you refrain from it. Or any of the other breaking the precept. Force yourself not to tell that lie, not to steal that thing. Force yourself not to take that drink, right? But that's sort of a forced behavior. But at least if you do that, it can minimize some of the painful results had you not done it. But it doesn't purify the thoughts that generated those initial actions. And the concentration is also a kind of a forced, force yourself to fix your attention on the tip of the nose or some other object and hold it there, come hell or high water, if you happen to succeed in that, the mind might be able to forcibly push those defilements down in the unconscious for a while. And you might feel very peaceful, and very light and peaceful, and a lot of happy sensations and so on. But it's sort of like pushing the head of a jack-in-a-box down into the box and putting on the lid. So as long as you're able to keep your attention fixed at the tip of the nose, or whatever other object you might be concentrating on, like chanting a mantra, om, 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 or whatever, you might succeed in temporarily stopping those hindrances. But it probably won't last for very long. Just like the jack-in-the-box, when you take the lid off the the can of the Jack-in-the-Box, what happens? Boing, the head comes up. So, anyway, so purification of view is the beginning of actually purifying ignorance. That means not knowing the truth. So purification of view is called the Ditti Visuddhi. Ditti means views. There's so many types of views about the world. And, some of the Buddhist texts, it talks about 64 different types of views concerning the world. What is it? Who made it? When did it start? And so many speculative questions about it. But specifically in the Buddhist teaching, purification of view, it's going by the view of Dhamma. So purification of view basically revolves around the Buddhist teaching about the five aggregates. That what we call myself in this body and mind is a process of the five aggregates of material form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness, or often shortened to just name and form, or materiality and mentality. So name and form, or mentality and materiality, refers to the process of the material world, everything in the material world, including this flesh and bone body, and all the rocks and the trees and everything we call the material substance, is called form or materiality.